One of the reasons that I wrote this book was because when I initially stumbled upon the power of this medium, I really started to research and look for professional texts and articles out there that would help support my instruction, because I wanted to be within best practices in literacy instruction. However, I was kind of dismayed to find that there really weren't a lot of text out there or articles out there that discussed using this medium specifically with elementary students. There's a wealth of information out there for using comics and graphic novels with high school students, and probably just as much out there for using this medium with middle school students. But not a whole lot out there for elementary students. And right now we're seeing so many publishers starting to market Graphica for the elementary reader. I felt like it was time that we needed some type of professional text that would answer that call to what do I do with this medium now that my kids are reading it. The analogy that I use to discuss the conventions of Graphica is to talk about how whenever we teach students to read nonfiction, we sit with them and we spend time exploring the conventions of nonfiction. We look at captions, we look at graphs, we look at pictures, we look at the index, the table of contents, various conventions of nonfiction. Well, the same thing applies whenever we're talking about Graphica. We need to show students those conventions as well, including narrative boxes, speech balloons, the frames, the gutters, lots of different things that students need to be able to attend to whenever they're reading Graphica. One of the conventions in Graphica that's actually quite obvious, but we don't notice it as much, is the pictures, the actual graphic representation of the meaning. We tend to just accept that as a normal part of Graphica, but in fact it's a very powerful part because the pictures hold the meaning in the text. The pictures work with the words in the book to bring about the meaning in a more concise way and to support those struggling and reluctant readers in understanding new vocabulary, understanding concepts, or simply understanding the plot line of the story. One of the most recognizable conventions of Graphica is the speech bubble. Most people are very familiar with that convention, and it conveys what the speakers in the story are saying, which is really helpful to readers who are not really doing so well in traditional text, in that oftentimes readers get lost in traditional text because they're not sure who's speaking. One of the great things about Graphica is it identifies the speaker immediately for the reader, who can then be successful in going through the story and understanding the text a little better. You also want to notice whenever you're looking at Graphica the narrative boxes. Narrative boxes are essentially placekeepers for the story or the text. They tell you lots of important things. And one of the things that they can tell you is the setting, the time, and the place. They'll introduce it later in Manhattan or something like that to let you know that the setting has changed. Often they'll introduce new characters who are arriving on the scene in the middle of a story are introduced sometimes through the narrative boxes. Another important convention of Graphica is the idea of the frames. We also call those panels. These are the square boxes that you'll see throughout Graphica, and they contain the pictures and the text. They add together cumulatively in a puzzle-like manner to create the meaning and to flow through the process of making meaning with the readers. One of the things that I found really interesting instructionally is that the narrative box can actually be the main idea of the frame, which is really wonderful whenever we go to show students how that works in traditional texts. For instance, I might say, when you just read this paragraph, if it were a panel in Graphica, what would the narrative box say? And oftentimes that can bring about a better understanding of what we mean when we say main idea. There are several misconceptions out there about Graphica that I often have to spend time clearing up. One of them is that Graphica is only available in fiction. The other one is that appropriate Graphica for the elementary reader simply doesn't exist. Neither of these are true. When we think about Graphica being available only in fiction, that might have been true at some point, but currently we're seeing a lot of Graphica written in nonfiction format, and it's really wonderful because we can use that nonfiction format in Graphica to bring about tons of concepts in our content areas and thereby connect literacy instruction to the content area. Specifically in social studies and history lessons, we're seeing a lot of Graphica based on biographies and historical wars and events that need symbolic representation for our students, because we can't take them back in time to see what it was like, for instance, to be in the Civil War.